And a reason that everyone in existence is a big fan of Tuesdays is because it's Math Tuesday. Math Tuesday. Math Tuesday. My favorite day of the week. So, if you're new to Math Tuesday, what we do is we go inside the numbers and we crunch them, we break them all down, we add them all up, we subtract them, we divide them, we multiply them, PEMDAS, all of the math.
PEMDAS.
It's basically Calculus Tuesday around these parts. And so Mallory and I were talking, and we were very interested on the main goal of what we wanted to find. We provided a lot more information than this, but the main goal of what we wanted to find was what was the average number of points scored in the 2022 Texas high school football season in each classification. Now, we assume that 6-man was going to be higher than any of the 11-man classification, but we wanted to include them in this because, so what? So we went through, and we have found the metric for, let me pull up one of these graphics here so I can look real fast because I need to make sure I get this all right. Where did I put them?
You slacked them to me.
I did Slack them to you. That's a
you
good idea.
You can check on Slack.
So we are listing the total number of teams in each classification because that is different in every single one of them. The total number of points that classification scored. Then we averaged out and found the average number of points scored for each classification. And then we also listed the team that scored the most amount of points and the least amount of points in all 11 UIL classifications. So we will start from largest to smallest, and then at the end I'll give you a little bit of summary of some of the highlights since we have all these graphics. We will put this out in a full article on TexasFootball.com, so if you miss any of this or want to see any of the graphics again, I'll be sending that out right after the show. But let's get started on Math Tuesday with 6A, the largest UIL classification. So there are 249 total teams in Class 6A. Altogether, if you look down there at the bottom in the red, the total number of points scored for 6A was 77,875 points.
That's a big number.
That's a massive number of points.
Crazy.
Again, 249 teams. You'll see that this is by far the largest classification because they're all lumped in during the season. They do not split until playoffs, but 77,875 is quite the number. That averages out to the average number of points scored by a 6A team is 312.03. The highest scoring team, this probably does not come as a surprise to most, is Austin Westlake, 763 points. The lowest number of points scored by a 6A team in the 2022 season was 15 by El Paso Socorro. Moving on now to 5A Division 1, 132 teams. So you see that from the 249 teams substantially reduced. Remember, 5A through 1A is all split into two divisions throughout the entire season. A total number of points being 40,264 points. That average, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's crazy. I mean, the difference between 6A and 5A Division 1.
Yep.
That point total. That's crazy.
Yep. Well, and it's honestly, if you think about it, it says a lot about 5A Division 1 and how many points they're putting up, because if you take 77,000, say we just round it to 77,000 there, and then you divide it by 2, I mean, that's about 38,000
that's a good point,
between the two.
That's a really, really good point.
Now, obviously, you'll notice that the, Division 1 or sometimes Division 2 has more teams in it with some of these classifications. But regardless, if you were to split it right down the middle and say there were an even number of teams in both, it would be about 38,000 would be the average for 6A. So it says a lot about the high scoring of 5A Division 1 when you think about it that way. But the average number of points scored would be 305.03. Alito coming in, the state champs, with 649 points scored. And then the lowest number of points scored by a 5A Division 1 team was Houston Northside at 35. Moving on down to 5A Division 2. Only 119 teams in 5A Division 2. The total points scored, 36,923. So honestly, that's another big indication because there wasn't that many more teams in 5A Division 1,
Right.
yet there was, what was that,
40,000 to it, yeah.
I mean, about 5,000 more extra points scored. Average points scored at 310.27. The team with the highest number of points scored was Liberty Hill by 754 points. And I would need to go back and look at who the second was there, but I believe this was like one of the largest differentials between the first team and the second team in scoring points. Liberty Hill just blew up the score with 754 points. The lowest scoring 5A Division 2 team was the Parrots of Fort Worth Polytechnic with 36 points. Moving on down to 4A Division 1. Only 99 teams in 4A Division 1. They had 31,123 total points scored. The average number of points was 314.37. The highest number was 688 points by China Spring. Obviously, they played a lot more games than everyone else, considering they were state champions.
Right.
But that was a pretty large margin on that one, too.
Yeah.
The lowest number of points scored by a 4A Division 1 team was Fort Worth Diamond Hill with just 14 points in the 2022 season. So quite the gap there between the highest scoring and lowest scoring.
Yes.
Moving on to 4A Division 2. This is the 11-man classification with the least amount of teams in it, yet the highest average out of any 11-man. That's pretty noteworthy because there's only 93 teams, yet their average points scored were 333. So out of 11-man, it's the smallest number of teams with the highest number of average points. Carthage, the 482 state champs, led the way with 767 points. The lowest number of points with Bridge City at 60. And you'll notice some of those other ones we were talking about with the Fort Worth Diamond Hill, they only had 14 points, or El Paso Socorro in 6A only had 15 points. You're talking about the lowest number of points being 60. That's where that really high average came into play, is that there might have been a couple of outliers at some of those other classifications that were super, super low, and that'll take the average down pretty hefty. So when you have 60 being your lowest, that average is going to get pretty high. Moving on down to the 3A classification in 3A Division 1, 104 total teams, so a pretty big jump over either 4A classification. The total points scored, 32,849. That averages out to 316.29 average points scored. Franklin, with the highest number of points scored at 695, and the Red Ants of Progresso down there with just 22 points. Moving on to 3A Division 2. There are 101 total teams. They scored 30,180 points total, averaging out to 298.81 points being your average. Canadian coming in with a whopping 761 points. This actually surprised me.
I was going to say, I thought it was going to be Gunner.
It was going to be Gunner, and I can
Is Gunner second? Was Gunner at least second?
I would believe so. I can look that up here in just a second.
Which says a lot about Canadian and how many points they put up per game.
Yeah, we're going to go to
When did they, I can't remember, which round did they lose in? Canadian?
They lost to Gunner in the...
When did they meet up?
Regional finals or
regional
state semis?
Yeah.
State semis. Okay.
Yeah, that still says a lot. I mean...
Yeah, actually, no. Gunner was not second. Canadian had 761. And then I believe the next highest scoring team was Poth with 702.
Okay.
Gunner only had 638 points. So Canadian offensively was
clicking.
Unbelievable this year.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then the lowest points scored in 3A Division 2 was Tornillo with 12 points.
They should be the Tornadoes.
Correct.
Every time I hear that. The Tornadoes.
Correct. I have no notes. Your note is outstanding.
Correct.
Moving on down to the 2A classifications. In 2A Division 1, 105 teams scoring a total of 32,456 points. That averages out to 309.1, being the average point scored by a 2A Division 1 team. Timpson, Terry Bussey and his Bears scored 732 points this season.
The machine.
They are a machine. Coming down with the lowest amount of points is Norman G at 62. So another one that is very similar to 4A Division 2. The reason their average is so much higher is because when you're bottoming out at 62 points, that's a lot better than 14 or 12 or anything.
Right.
So less outliers in 2A Division 1. Moving on to 2A Division 2, the smallest 11-man classification. There are exactly 100 teams in 2A Division 2. They scored 28,802 points. That averaged out to 288.02 points scored. Mart coming in with a whopping 876 points. Still were not able to get it done and claim a state championship. They made it, just weren't able to get it done, but 876 points for Coach Kevin Hoffman and his Mart Panthers squad, and then the lowest of which being Wheeler at 103. So I do want to make a quick asterisk here, because technically speaking, the lowest scoring team in 2A Division 2 would have been Midland TLCA, but they only played a very few amount of games. Let's see, they forfeited 7 of their 10 games. So they had moved up into 2A Division 2, and then it was very much not for them. So they forfeited 7 of the 10 games, and they're going to be going back down to TCAL 6-man, which I believe is private school. So we didn't end up counting that. So Wheeler was technically the second, but they played a full schedule. So that's why that number is a little bit higher than what we've seen in the past, because technically they were the second and not the last. But with Midland TLCA being kind of an odd duck there, we decided to do it for someone who actually played a full schedule. So, moving on down now to our smallest classifications. These are our 6-man classifications. Remember, a ton of scoring in 6-man, and would you look at that? Just 75 teams in 1A Division 1. They scored 32,394, meaning their average points scored was an astounding 431.92. By far the most out of anyone, but with 6-man ball and one of the smallest number of teams in it, that's what equals out to that average. Irion County coming in with 848 points scored. To put that into perspective, this is a 6-man classification, and Mart still scored more points than them in 2A Division 2, which is wild to think about.
Right.
And then Wellman Union coming in at 71 points at the lowest. And then finally, rounding this all out with 1A Division 2, there are 73 teams, just 2 teams shy of 1A Division 1. They scored 28,039 points. That averages out to 384.1. Oakwood coming in with the most of any team in the UIL by 1. With 877, because Mart was 876.
Oh, right.
So by 1 point scored, technically out of any UIL program, they scored the most amount of points.
Who was second in 1A Division 2?
I would have to look that up. I can look that up in a minute.
Is Benjamin D1?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then the lowest amount was Welch Dawson with 52. This is another one of those scenarios like 2A Division 2 where Midland TLCA was a very odd scenario. The same thing happened here with Dimebox. Dimebox technically was marked down at 0 points on the year, but they also forfeited a bunch of games, so we went with the second lowest, which would be Welch Dawson. So there you go. There is a look at some scoring breakdown comparison. If you're interested, at just some here. The 11-man team with the highest points scored was Mart at 876. The 6-man team was Oakwood at 877. The 11-man team with the lowest amount of points scored was Tornillo at 12. The 6-man team with the lowest point scored was Welch Dawson at 52. The 11-man classification with the highest average points scored was 4A Division II, 333.86. And the highest total points scored was 6A with that astounding 770.
Right.
Or 77,000. And then, let's see, is there anyone else? The 11-man classification with the lowest total points scored was 2A Division II at 28,802.
Gotcha.
So, there you go.
Great segment.
Some
really,
scoring
really good job.
breakdowns there that we were just interested to see. We started off with the average, and it just kind of grew from there. So shout out to our good friend Jerry Forrest at pigskinprep.com for helping us out by supplying some of those numbers there. But it's interesting to look at.
Very interesting.
So there we go. There is Math Tuesday.